This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta. Stack the deck in your favor in 2025 with a stacked cereals lineup of crop protection products from Syngenta. With proven technology for exceptional disease control and greater plant resilience, you'll find game-changing solutions for your wheat crop. Visit syngenta.ca for more info.
Good day, and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, February the 26th. On this episode of the Word, spring, baby, spring. Hey, lots of updates to run through. A great discussion, I hope, on nitrogen, some rye watchouts, and get to as many agronomy answers as I can at the end of this episode. Let's go! Baby, spring has sprung, the sap has started to run. Unbelievable. A few warm days, a little bit of sunshine, and yes, the maple trees, the sap is running. We're making maple syrup. That's always one of the best times of the year for Wheat Pete, but it just astounds me. Winter was dragging on, so much snow, so much cold. All it takes is 2 or 3 decent days with some sunshine, and it just feels like everybody's outlook has improved. At some meetings this week, yesterday at Middlesex Soil and Crops Update, and the mood was much more positive, I think, than it would have been a week ago. That is awesome. Remember, meteorological spring starts Saturday, so we are here, and man, it is nice. Meanwhile, the leftover remnants of the impact of all the winter, Dungannon Dan tweeting out a picture of his wheat field, and really amazing. So Dan is along Lake Huron. He's in the blasted area, Highway 21 shut down, I don't know for how long, most of February. Meanwhile, he can park his pickup truck, and it's basically hidden by the snowbanks. He takes a picture out in his wheat field where you would say there's got to be tons of snow. The wind has had such force this year, particularly coming off Lake Huron, that there's almost no snow cover in areas of that wheat field. You could see the wheat leaves poking through, and you just go, man, that is amazing to see that much difference just right there. I don't know what it was, 100 feet apart or something like that. Hopefully there was enough snow cover there to protect that wheat from cold temperatures. I expect it'll be fine. No use worrying about it at this point. Just let's see what happens once we get rid of this snow and things do start to grow. By the way, the way that spring has started so far, without any rainfall, with some great maple syrup weather, 9-degree days, something like that, sunshine, goes down to -4, -5 at night. It's really a good way to get rid of the snow, because we have enough snow. If we got into a lot of rain, the snow melted fast, a 15, 18-degree days, warm overnight, then we're going to get ponding on the wheat field. We would really prefer not to have that. Meanwhile, here's a great book suggestion from Kevin in Essex County. There is a book called Country Boy Soul. The author is Jody Durand. He is a hog farmer, was a hog farmer, I believe. Anyway, it's about agriculture. Kevin said that it just left him drained. It was so powerful. So if you're looking for a book, Country Boy Soul sounds like a good one. Wheat Pete's going to try to read that while he's on holidays next week, if he can at all. As well, March Manure Mondays are coming back, and so get signed up. It's every Monday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's a webinar. It's hosted by Andrew Barry and Chris Brown from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, but there is some incredible topics there. One of the days is Quirine Ketterings and Kirsten Workman from Cornell University. They did a session at the Eastern Ontario Crop Conference, part of the Ontario Ag Conference, but unfortunately, as they recorded that session, most of it got lost. There's only the last 18 minutes there, and there's such amazing information in that particular session. I really encourage you, sign up. We'll put in the post the link to go to sign up for March Manure Mondays. If you can at all, sign up and watch those shows. In Corrine's data, they have learned that oftentimes, let me back up, oftentimes, we just don't understand why when we put manure on a field and we test the manure and it says we should get 100 pounds of nitrogen out of that manure, if we give the full 100-pound credit, we don't always see that show up for the crop, and we starve the crop for nitrogen and it's all bad. So we get almost a little gun shy to give the full nitrogen credit. What Corrine has found is that if you only apply manure once in a blue moon, like Wheat Beat does on his farms, because I don't have manure, sometimes I can get it, but not very frequently, well, the microbiology in the soil isn't there when you do apply manure to work on the manure and release that nitrogen the way you would like it to release. Meanwhile, if you're a regular manure user, even when there isn't manure for a year, the microbiology, it's in the soil, it's laying dormant, it's ready to rumble when you apply that manure. And so you apply it and it takes off and you get that nitrogen credit. The cool thing about this is that Corrine is developing a test where if we test the soil for microbiological activity about the same time as we would take a pre-citrate nitrate test, so that 10th of June, V6 to V8, they can predict the nitrogen release based on the microbiology. So there's way more to it than that. That was just the very tail end of that particular presentation. Sign up for March Manure Mondays. I just think it's ever so cool. All right, next, there's lots more program money becoming available. There's new money from the off-calf program. Go to the OSCIA website and look there. You can sign up actually for an email that tells you about new program details. I'm not a program guy. I'm not going down that road, but there are dollars available. So look on the OSCIA website. And by the way, also contact your conservation authorities. I don't know if I've ever seen so many programs available to do different things. Get out there, figure out what works for you and where you can improve the environment, improve your agricultural practices, and utilize that money for that. All right, next. Oh, this is a sad note. So most of the winter, I have been really encouraging producers to make sure they get the app on their cell phone called Field Profit. And profit is P-R-O-P-H-E-T. So profit as in we're predicting. Unfortunately, Field Profit is no longer available. And so Martin let me know he went to put it on. He says, Pete, it isn't there anymore. They're shutting it down. I contacted Damon Smith. He's the pathologist for Wisconsin. Just like Albert Tunuta is our pathologist, he's the guy that developed it. Unfortunately, they could not find anybody to fund Field Profit, so Field Profit is no longer available. We'll figure something out, but Field Profit was such a valuable tool to predict tar spot and to predict white mold, so I'm really disappointed that that's disappeared. Hopefully we figure out some way to get it available for growers here in Ontario. All right, next, a grower called me up and left a message and said, hey Pete, so I know you're Wheat Pete, but I really think that you should reconsider and, I don't know, become Barley Pete or something like that, because he grew winter barley last year and he just wanted to tell me that he got 3.8 tons of barley per acre. I did the math because I think in bushels. It's bad to think in bushels, but that's 175 bushel per acre winter barley. Way to go. That's amazing. When I do the conversion, though, that's the same as 140 bushel wheat. So it's great, but it's maybe not quite as good as it sounds. But nonetheless, that is awesome winter barley. Keep doing it. I can't argue with that. But I'm still going to be Wheat Pete because that's just the way I like to go. Here's one last thing that I got from my good friend Paul. So he is getting hit with some rented ground close to the city, and the developers said to the farmer that is cropping that land, "Thou shalt not grow soybeans, because soybeans fix nitrogen, and that nitrogen could end up in the water, will have high nitrate levels in the soil, and therefore that will impact our ability to develop that land. Thou shalt not grow soybeans." And it's just one of those situations where a little information is a dangerous thing, because they're right. Soybeans fix nitrogen. But the latest work that Horst Bonner has done, and many other soybean specialists, is at the very most, soybeans fix 65%, or 2/3 of the nitrogen that they remove off the field. And that means they rob the soil the other 1/3 of that nitrogen. So a 60 bushel crop, I think, is 240 pounds of nitrogen. The crop fixes about 160 pounds of nitrogen. So it's fixing 2/3, but it's robbing the soil of 80 pounds of nitrogen. When we look at something like a corn crop, the corn crop, we put on 160 pounds of nitrogen, the corn crop takes off. Guess what? A 200 bushel corn crop takes off 160 pounds of nitrogen, give or take. And so you just go, okay, there's almost always more nitrates left in the soil following a corn crop, following a wheat crop, than there is following a soybean crop. It's just the way that works, just showing that a little nitrogen is a dangerous thing. I think they'll get that figured out, because we have the data to show that we won't get high nitrate levels following a soybean crop. Really interesting, though. And on nitrogen, a great article from Fabian Fernandez. He's University of Minnesota. And this pertains more to our Western listeners, but he's been in the game a long time, and so he just wrote an article. I think it was 38 years of experience or something like that. The 4 things that he has learned about nitrogen. Number 1, spring applied nitrogen is virtually always better than fall applied nitrogen. Now, everybody in Eastern Canada and Eastern US is saying, what are you talking about? Fall applied nitrogen. We know you can't apply nitrogen in the fall because we lose it. But when we go to the cold, dry climates, fall nitrogen application is actually pretty common. And part of it is logistics, because they just can't get everything done in the spring. But in Fabian's data set, the spring nitrogen is 9 to 34 bushels per acre than fall applied nitrogen, and it just makes perfect sense. So for the Western listeners, if you can figure out how to apply it in the spring, you just have this big extended period over winter where the nitrogen is at risk. It doesn't mean you will lose some, but it is at risk. And in Fabian's work on corn, 9 to 34 bushel difference. I will say, though, here in the East, the one crop we do put nitrogen on in the fall is winter canola. We need to put that 30 pounds, give or take, or 40 of nitrogen on in the fall, because winter canola needs to get some growth. Not wheat, not barley. It's only on the winter canola crop. Next, his second point, anhydrous is better than urea. Now again, Eastern Canada, we don't use anhydrous anymore, and it's a safety, a human safety thing. They still do a fair bit in Western Canada, but yep, anhydrous is better because it sort of sterilizes the zone around where it goes in, and it stops the transformation from ammonia to ammonium. And with urea, if you apply fall urea, even if it's protected urea, we don't stop that process as long, and if it gets to the nitrate form, it's more subject to loss. So if you're going to do it in the fall, as much as spring is better than fall, anhydrous is definitely better than urea. Here's the next one, and this is really interesting. So from Minnesota data, a split nitrogen application is always, I repeat, always better on sand soils. And it's because if you get too much water, that nitrogen does tend to leach. On all other soil types, there's no real benefit to split nitrogen unless it's an extremely wet year. If it's an extremely wet year, then split nitrogen is better on clay soils, fine textured soils, because we can get into that nitrogen loss from denitrification. But he says that isn't 100%, because sometimes you split apply on a heavy soil and you get some nitrogen loss from the first application, just like you do if you put it all on up front. But lo and behold, you put the second application on. If it's a wet year, it often stays a wet year, and even that second application, you can get some loss. So yeah, split nitrogen definitely on sands and on a wet year on clay, but not as consistent as we would like it to be. And so, yep, that's pretty typical from a yield perspective. Don't forget, though, split nitrogen applications reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. So from an environmental standpoint, it's absolutely a good thing. Last but not least, drained soil on a wet year is always more yield, less nitrogen loss, and better nitrogen use efficiency. So I think all of those things are really, really quite important. On Tech Talk Tuesday last night, the other really interesting thing, and again, it's John Jones' presentation from the Ontario Ag Conference. Remember, Ontario Ag Conference sessions are available virtually until March 31st, so keep watching them. There's so much good information there. But John's data is quite clear. If you have low soil test of phosphorus and potash or either one, then automatically your yield potential drops. But what's more interesting is that it will take you more nitrogen to get less yield. And so your nitrogen use efficiency really drops. And John said last night that they can find that additional nitrogen after the corn crop gets taken off. So environmentally, those low soil tests for phosphorus and potash leading to poor nitrogen use efficiency, that's a bad thing environmentally, because it means more of that nitrogen is available to go out the tile, down the Mississippi, and cause the dead zone down there in the Gulf of Mexico. So really, really interesting stuff. As well, here's on nitrogen stabilizers. So Mary has asked a great question on nitrogen stabilizers. I'll get to it in just a second. But in Josh Naselski's presentation, we've talked lots about, when do I use a nitrogen stabilizer? Do I always need to use it? The answer is no. Then how do I decide? Well, one of the things that we have not talked about that Josh had in his data set is that your cation exchange capacity makes a difference in how likely you are to get loss, volatilization loss, from a nitrogen application. And so Josh's threshold number is 25. If you have a cation exchange capacity of 25 or higher, your risk of volatilization drops significantly. On the other hand, your pH also matters. If you have a high pH, your risk of volatilization loss increases. So you can be on a sand soil with a low cation exchange capacity, but if your pH is 5.8, well, you're at less risk of volatilization loss than you might expect. On the other hand, if you're like Wheat Pete and you got some clay knolls where it just got eroded before I ever got there, we have a pH of 8.2. Well, my CEC is 28, but at that pH, I'm still at risk of loss. But using the CEC and your pH to help you decide when you need nitrogen stabilizers, that's something that we haven't done before that I absolutely think we have to get into. Okay, Mary saying, Peter, 40% ESN. That's what we've always been doing on our corn. We put all of our nitrogen on up front. We work it in. 40% ESN, it's costing us $17 an acre to use ESN versus using only urea. What's the good and the bad? What's the options? Are we doing the right thing? So first off, Mary, you're absolutely environmentally doing a good thing from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, because that ESN will act like a split application. That's a good thing. However, it is a polymer coated, so the polymer, it stays in the soil. It's a very small amount. I don't think it has any big impacts, but it is a polymer, so it is sort of one of those things that you go, Okay, that's a bit of a concern. And then you say $17 an acre. So the other option would be to hire somebody to come in and side dress that 40% of your nitrogen. If you can do a side dress application for less than $17 an acre, then likely that's going to be more economically beneficial to you than the all up front, and it will give you the same environmental benefit because you're splitting your nitrogen. There's no easy answer to that, but it's a great, great thought process. Okay, Trevor saying, Peter, fertilizer placement, corn starter. Right now, just the way that our equipment is set up, we're using a starter fertilizer band, but we're only getting it basically half an inch into the soil, on top of the soil. It's going to cost me $300 a row to upgrade and actually get that fertilizer placed into the soil, 2 inches below the seed and 2 inches to the side of the corn plant. A 24-row planter, that's a lot of money. Does it make sense? And the answer is yes. So when you look at the data, Trevor, somewhere between a 5-bushel yield gain to a 30-bushel yield gain from getting the phosphorus where the plant can access it. Remember, corn, it doesn't have surface feeder roots, especially in the early growth stages, not until it gets brace roots for sure. So it needs phosphorus early growth, and that's why we get that yield benefit. When you do the math, if we look at, just pull a number, we're going to say we get an 8-bushel yield increase. Man, it will only take you 144 acres to pay for getting that fertilizer well placed. I think that's really, really good economics. Okay, last but not least, Archie asking about rye and taking forage rye off and planting that corn or that field back into silage corn, and wondering, do I have to spray out the rye? Will it regrow? So first off, Archie, yes, it will regrow. And so, when we look at the impact of early weed competition on corn, it has to be sprayed off, no doubt. But Tyler sent me some really interesting data. They've been working with Jake Monroe from the Ministry of Agriculture and doing some rye cover crop after soybeans that then goes into corn the next year. In their trials, it is 30 bushels less corn. In Jake's small plot work at Elora, it is 51 bushels per acre less corn. Planting corn after cereal rye is really, really hard. If you're going to do it, for goodness sakes, make sure you at least strip till it. Try to kick the rye root balls out of the row because the rye is allelopathic, and make sure you don't short the crop on either nitrogen or sulfur because any added stress is going to make that allelopathic impact worse. I have lots more to talk about that in terms of the rye situation, but I am out of time. That's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. This is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, the 26th of February. The next one will be in March, baby. Hey, keep the messages coming, the questions. It's all a ton of fun, and we will talk to you next week. See you then.